Hey everybody, wake up. This is Wake Up with Mark Joyner, episode number 109. And today I will talk about why this new Philippines anti-sexual harassment law should terrify you. All right, so I just finished my morning routine, and on days like this, boy, am I glad I have got practices to put my mind in a positive frame, to take care of my body, to handle stress correctly, because this is some terrifying stuff I'm about to tell you about. And even if you don't live in the Philippines, you don't have friends who live in the Philippines, you don't think it matters to you, I'm going to tell you that it does matter to you. It matters to you greatly. It should matter to all of us. This is part of a larger trend of legislation that is happening around the world right now that is getting increasingly Orwellian. And if you remain asleep, it's going to get worse. All right? Listen, wake up, guys. People, seriously, this is some crazy, crazy stuff going on here. Now, there's so much to unpack here. I'm going to speak about this very briefly. I'm actually going to shoot a new episode of The Last Men with my buddy Mitch Miller later today. We are going to attempt to get this out, released very quickly, in fact, because this is such an urgent issue. Let me just say first off, I am not for sexual harassment. Okay, I'm not saying men should be allowed to harm women. I don't think people should discriminate or be unkind to people because of their sexual orientation or anything like that. Quite the opposite. Most people who know me personally know that I tend to be pretty gentle and kind with people. There are times when I am not, when I think it's appropriate, but that's my determination. I like having a broad berth of freedom. Many people who are advocates of freedom of speech, believe that free speech especially should be given as broad a berth as possible because, as I have said here many times, if you control speech, you control thought. And if you control thought, you control actions. Now, Jordan Peterson took a stand recently against a law in Canada, which was written such that somebody who used the wrong gender pronouns could be thrown in jail. He made a famous, brave stand against this as a tenured professor and has somehow miraculously managed to maintain his tenure in his university, despite the fact that universities these days are becoming increasingly sympathetic of this kind of legislation. So that's one thing. Two, when you write laws like this and they are ambiguous, and then you create enforcement regimes around them, you are creating something that looks a little bit like what the Taliban would do. Okay, and I don't know if you have looked up what happened when ISIS was creating its caliphate, but people who lived inside the Islamic State, which is seemingly dismantled now, who knows? There were guys who would walk around the streets and they would find people who were making infractions against any of the multiple rules in the Quran. If you were running your business incorrectly, if you were a woman who was wearing the wrong kind of stuff, who wasn't covering things up enough, there's a guy who would walk around and would summarily shuttle you off to a Sharia law court to have you examined, and then somebody could give you, rather swift summary punishment. Well, there are similar regimes in this Philippine legislation I will talk about here in a moment. Now, let me also say, I am a great friend of the Philippines. I have hired many people there. I have many friends there. I have conducted relief work in the Philippines. I have spent years there. I love the people there. What I'm talking about here right now is the government, and it's very important for us to distinguish between the government of a country and its people. Governments do not always reflect the will of the people. When we look at some of the foreign interventions going on around the world conducted in the name of the United States, a lot of people will come to me and say, well, you're an American, you're a former soldier, you're responsible for this. No, I'm not actually. You're making the assumption that governments actually act on the behalf of people. They don't. Most of the time, they don't. Even though we elect people, people say, well, you elected them, it's your responsibility. You can't know what's in the heart of someone. You can only guess. And when there are financial interests and other influence groups out there influencing members of Congress in the United States and other government officials to make decisions that go against the will of the people, that go against the best interests of the people, this is not the responsibility of the people. Okay, it's the responsibility of the people to do something about it if they see it, and too many people are asleep now. We're letting too many things go by. We're all too busy and too distracted to care about any of this stuff. But we have to distinguish these things. And I also want to state for the record that when I am in a foreign country, which I often am, I want to respect the laws of that country. I am a guest in that country. It's important that I do that. When I go back to the Philippines, whatever the laws are, I will respect the laws. I have to. So if any Philippine government officials see this video and think this is me telling people to flaunt the laws, that is not the case. What I am advising people to do, however, is to stand up against a law that I think is frankly bullshit. Not just bullshit, it is insanely Orwellian bullshit. Okay? Let me give you some examples here of some of the stuff that's written in there. Some of the things that are not allowed under this new law are, for example, unwanted invitations. Unwanted invitations. Now, who determines whether or not an invitation is unwanted? Now, obviously, if you invite a young lady, for example, out to dinner, she may want that invitation. She may not want that invitation. She can determine that. Now, how will somebody asking someone out on a date, for example, know whether or not that they're going to want that invitation? How will you be able to ask anyone out on a date without fearing whether or not you will be thrown in jail? Thrown in jail. Okay, seriously. Okay, infraction number 1 gets you 1,000 peso fine. All right, and then some sexual harassment training. You have to go to an education camp, a wrong think training camp to teach you what kinds of behaviors are acceptable and what kind of behaviors are not. That's infraction number 1. Now, keep in mind that the average Filipino makes 500 pesos a day. All right. So if somebody just decides, well, I'm going to accuse this guy of something, a guy might lose 1,000 pesos. If a guy has a family to feed and he's barely scraping by, this can get quite costly for someone. Next violation could get you several days in confinement. Third violation can get you up to 30 days confinement. And some of the violations, if made online, have like some enormous penalties. And businesses could be shut down if they don't enforce these things. Okay, so their businesses now in the Philippines are going to be required to post policies about this stuff. And if it is looked upon that a Philippines business is not creating the proper environment, that business could lose its license. That means the livelihood of entire families could be shut down based on the whim and opinions of certain people. Now, and this is a part of the whole problem here is the lack of, how do you determine these things, right? How do we know whether or not someone is making a claim maliciously? Now, some people will say that there is this thing in the United States of this Believe Women campaign, meaning anytime a woman claims that she was raped, you must believe her. I'm sorry, that's insanity. That's absolute insanity. There is a reason why we have due process in most legal systems, to prevent people from just being able to, on a whim, say, hey, this guy did this to me, throw him in jail. Do you really want to give people that power? All right. There's another one. Another part of this is leering. Leering. If you leer at people a certain way, you could be caught. You could be identified as a violator of these laws. Leering. So who's going to define what is leering? How much cant do I have to have in my eyebrow for it to be a leer? Are we going to measure how much cant in the eyebrow? How are we going to know this? How are we going to know it? Well, the Philippines police officers are now going to be deputized to be enforcers of these laws. And if they catch you in flagrante delicto in the middle of the act, they could immediately apprehend you and take you to the nearest Philippine police station to face charges. You could be immediately apprehended if you are seen leering at someone the wrong way or using offensive language, making someone feel uncomfortable. This is absolute madness. This is absolute madness. And if you are a Filipino citizen and you are not standing up against this, I think you're making a really, really big mistake. Because I ask you, do you want to live in such an Orwellian world? Do you want to live in a Taliban-like world where there are people walking around enforcing minor infractions against these laws? Now, another thing I'm going to say here, which I know is going to get a lot of controversy from a lot of people, and I don't care at this point. How many times does this happen in the real world? A guy likes a woman, he asks her out, she says no, he's persistent, and he eventually, gets a date with her. Okay, how often does that happen? It happens all the time, and I'll tell you why. Because we have culturally made it unacceptable for women to have sex with men. It's completely acceptable culturally for men to have sex with women, but it is unacceptable for women to have sex with men. So women have to often look like they are not interested in men in general, lest they get labeled as a slut. This is a reality, guys. This is a reality. And because of this, men need to be a little bit more aggressive often in their approach of women. And women often want the guy who's going to be a little bit more aggressive. I don't know many women, in my experience, who want a meek little bitch of a man, pardon my language, who's going to be like, maybe if you had some time, maybe we could go out on a date or something. I don't personally, my experience has not been that women are attracted to that. Okay. Women kind of want a guy who's, and I'm generalizing here. Every woman is different, by the way. And this is another part of a big part of this problem is that, this is all in the eye of the beholder. Some women want to be treated a certain way. Some women want to be treated another way. I don't think it's the government's job to tell women how they should want to be treated and to tell men how they should treat people. But in my experience, most women, again, my experience, tend to want a guy who has some balls, okay? Who is a little bit aggressive, who is sure of himself and is persistent. All right, now, so where do we draw the line between a guy being persistent with a woman, all right, and an unwanted invitation? And when can we know if a woman is going to react a certain way one time and then suddenly wake up the next day and say, well, actually I didn't want that invitation, now I'm going to report that guy? Women will have that power to do that. Women will have that power to do that. This is going to create enormous social chaos in the Philippines. It is going to create an Orwellian vibe where everybody is looking around paranoid. Okay? This is just as insane as this redonkulous social credit system being rolled out in China. And the people that are advocating these types of laws, are doing it under the name of protecting the weak, of protecting people. It's not what it's about. It's not what it's about at all. Okay? I am all for protecting the weak. If I am out there and I see a weak person being attacked, if I think it's safe for me to do so, I will usually go in and try to stop that. Sometimes that's not smart. You don't know whether or not somebody has a knife. There are times I've seen, I saw a mob of dudes, 10 guys beating up one guy. I'm not going to go jump in there and get beat to death myself, right? But I did call the police. I want to take care of people who are being treated unfairly. But where do you draw the line on some of these things? The way that law is written is so broad that it should chill the bones of everybody in that country. And here's why I think everybody outside of the Philippines should be concerned with this too. If this kind of legislation starts becoming the norm in countries, we are going to have an Orwellian world. Okay, if you don't know what I mean by that, if you have not read 1984, read it. Read it. That is a harbinger of what can happen to society if we allow legislation like this to stand. You need to stand up. You need to stand up and do something about this, and it is going to take personal risk. I'm taking personal risk by posting this. There are also provisions in the law that say that if foreigners are caught doing any of these things, they can be deported. As a guy who visits the Philippines a lot on business, I am taking a personal risk in shooting this video. Okay? I feel like it's important enough to do that. Do I want to be kicked out of that country? No. I love the people. I love that country. Yes, that country has a lot of problems that need to be solved, and the Filipinos are the first ones who will tell you about that, okay? That's no slight against the Filipino people, all right? But the biggest problem of that country is the corruption inside the government. And that's something else that the average Filipino will tell you. All right, most of the social problems in the Philippines are due to government corruption. The social inequity is largely due to government corruption. Okay, as a guy who attempted to get relief goods shipped into Tacloban after Typhoon Yolanda, aka Haiyan, and was told that school supplies that were donated to us that were sitting in a warehouse in Singapore could not be shipped in unless I bribed a local official. I will tell you firsthand that kind of corruption exists, and it is that ugly. It is that ugly. We were literally trying to get school supplies shipped into that country, but we could not get final authorization because there was a local official who was asking to be bribed. Fact. Okay? And that should not surprise anybody who is familiar with that country, that bribery is rampant there. Bribery is rampant in many countries, and I'm not trying to single out the Philippines. But the reason I'm making a stand here, and the reason I think you need to do so as well, and it is going to take risk on everybody's part, is because if we allow ourselves to be intimidated by this kind of utter horseshit, when is the line going to stop? Where is it going to? Where are we going to draw that line? When is all this going to stop? Seriously consider that. Seriously consider that. Again, if your counter argument for this is well, you must be for sexual harassment, or you must be for transphobia or homophobia or anything like that, no. I'm going to tell you categorically, no, that is not the case. All right. What I'm against is legislation that takes away people's freedoms and creates a system whereby people are living under paranoia and fear. I don't want to live like that. And the only way to prevent that from happening in the world is to take a stand against things like this. You normally do not see me getting this direct and confrontational about things. This is where you got to draw the line in the sand, guys. This is total bullshit. Stand up against it. If you're in the Philippines, change your government. And if you're outside of the Philippines, tell people about this. Talk about this, because it could spread to your country too. And you should care about the people in the Philippines who are about to be living under an Orwellian system because of this. And this has been signed into law, guys. It has been signed into law. This is not a proposal. This was signed by the president yesterday. Do something.